Okay, I wanted first to thank to the organizers for this, for the invitation, coming here to present this paper, and not also for the invitation, but also for the hospitality. It has been like really a pleasure to be here these days in the conference. So, well, the paper is on liberalism and religion. And I want to focus on the question about separation, of church-state separation, and the possibility of justifying some some interpretation of anticlericalism. So I wanted to find a more. I mean, this is not the wrong slide for the. I didn't bring the wrong image from the conference to this presentation, but I didn't find sort of catchy phrase that refers to the issue of education and related with some sort of religious authority. So this is not a talk on abortion. This is like a demonstration, like pro-life, pro-choice demonstration. But I like it because on the first hand, on one hand, it is some sort of catchy slogan. And on the other hand, it sends a twofold message. On the one hand, it is clearly a claim about the rights of abortion for women, but on the other, and this is not the claim I want to focus on, but I want to focus in some sort of implicit message it is also sending, that it is a message to the Catholic Church saying, okay, don't interfere with the rights of with our rights. So what I want to say, and what I want to highlight here is this second message is a sort of an anti-clerical message. They are basically saying the Catholic Church is having so much influence and so much power in political decisions and in political debates that is actually interfering with the already acquired or rights that people is struggling for. So and the focus of the paper is actually in trying to find a way to justify this anti-clerical claim and to say that this anti-clerical claim is not actually captured by the somehow mainstream conception of liberal secularism, which is basically the liberal pluralism version of secularism that comes from this Rawlsian idea of overlapping consensus and public reason. So I want to say that this claim for secularism, that it is implicit in this banner, is not captured by the liberal pluralist model of secularism, and being anti-clerical is not, however, some sort of anti-clerical in the sense of the French model of secularism that is has been identified as the wrong model of secularism, and has been characterized as anti-religious and oppressive towards religious minorities and so on and so forth. So I want to say the concept of secularism that is implicit in this sort of political claims is not captured by the liberal pluralist model, but is not authoritarian as it is usually said that all sort of anti-clerical claim is. So I will just present very briefly these two sort of models of secularism. On the one hand, the French model, and I want to highlight the criticism that has been raised against it. Then I will present the liberal pluralist model, and I will illustrate how it works in the field of education, and particularly in the case of the role of the presence of religion in the school or in the public schools. So and in the third step of the presentation, I will just illustrate how this liberal pluralist model has been applied in in two different cases. In one is in the Canadian province of Quebec that they have implemented this model. Actually, it has been defended by Charles Taylor and Jocelyn McClure, who are Canadians, and they defend this idea. And then I will focus also in the model how it has been implemented in Colombia, which has a different context, in which there is a majoritarian Catholic Church that has actually a history of Colombia has a history of religious establishment for more than 100 years until 1991, in the time in which this liberal pluralist model was implemented. So I want to show how this model like responds to the issues that pluralism raises in a society like Quebec, but it might not fit and might not be adequate for a society like Colombia, in which there is a religious majority and a politically active church. So I just move very quickly to the French model, which has been identified. It is identified with two pillars of the Republican or French model of secularism. Is the law of separation in 1905 and the laws of public education in the 1880s. So the law of separation basically says that the state is like this, there is like basically an institutional separation between the state and the church, and this is pretty much the liberal idea of separation, that there is some sort of independence between these two institutions. Basically, but in the context this was done is in a context in which actually the Catholic Church was, like the Catholic Church and the state were like more or less the same institution. So in the context these separation laws were implemented, it really implied an aggressive, so to speak, attitude against the Catholic Church, because it was actually excluded from the functions it was performing, like in, I don't know, in education it will be seen, but also in the public health system, tax system, and like actually the Catholic Church, even before the 1905, was performing the activities that we usually attribute today to the state. And the second pillar of the Republican laissez are the laws of public education. And here, what they were trying to do is to consolidate the project that was like underlying the intention of separation between the church and the state. So it basically is like grounded in these three famous values of the French Republic, which is like equality, freedom, and fraternity. But they had like very specific interpretations of each of these three values. So the role of public education was to implement this, to create citizens out of, like, it is very famous, this say, like, creating citizens creating the peasants into citizens, creating the French citizen who had, like, loyalty not to the Catholic Church, but to the state. So basically, this was done in a sense, like the interpretation of equality they were doing was all individuals are equal before the state. So when they go to public school, all differences between them are like neutralized. The state is blind to those differences. Then the interpretation they did about the value of freedom was, and this is like the most controversial, and the criticism relies mostly in this interpretation of individual autonomy, because it was understood as the criticism to religion. So the role of the public school was to liberate individuals from the darkness and prejudice and tradition of religion. And this is like inspired in the enlightened philosophy and the enlightened criticism to religion. And then the third value that the public education system was supposed to, or is supposed to implement, is the value of fraternity, in which, it is intended to consolidate the social cohesion or national identity, not in terms of a reference to the Catholic Church, but in terms of the state. So that here they follow this Rousseauian idea of civil religion, in which the individuals were supposed to praise the state instead of the Catholic Church. So this is basically very roughly the idea of French Republican secularism. And obviously this now, like, it is common currency to criticize this idea, because it's basically liberal and it's very clear with the interpretation they do of the value of individual autonomy. So I identified two sorts of criticism to this model. One is that it is authoritarian, and the other, which is not quite emphasized in the literature, it is just outdated. It shouldn't be implemented anymore because it already did what it was meant to do. So the criticism of authoritarianism, and here I'm following Charles Taylor, it is basically, it is not fair to impose a morality on individuals. So it is this secular morality, the civil religion that the French Republic was trying to impose. Well, why should individuals don't be allowed to be religious? So it is like just bringing an alien morality to replace a morality they had already endorsed. And this has like this is inherently authoritarian. This is usually thought about when you think about cultural differences. So like people who is not socialized in a Christian environment or in a Western environment, this is more clear, the case of imposition of an alien morality. But also if you think in the context of French, in which these laws were, this project was implemented, well, it was actually converting Catholics into secular citizens. So there is a sort of imposition of a morality that is considered to be inherently authoritarian. And the second criticism it is outdated. And I want to emphasize in this because, as I have already mentioned, the project was to sort of privatize the power of the Catholic Church, to send the Catholic Church into the private sphere, just to create the autonomy of the state and independence of the state from the interference of the Catholic Church. And well, if you take a look in contemporary France, this is already the case. The Catholic Church is not so politically active, and actually, French society is they are quite secular. The problems of secularism in France are not related with the incidence of the Catholic Church or the opposition the Catholic Church might have against the state. It is rather something different. It comes from problems related with immigration issues, like second or third generation of Muslims having more and more public visibility, and all the headscarves issue. And the criticism is like, it's just saying to French people, well, you can't apply a model you implemented for a political project in the early 20th century to an absolutely different problem there is now, which is the integrating or giving some sort of respect to the new generations of Muslim minority. So the idea is it shouldn't be used anymore because it already did what it was supposed to do. So now the alternative that has been proposed to this is the liberal pluralist model, which, as I already said, is highly influenced by Rawls' idea of overlapping consensus and public reason and this sort of motivations. And the point these people is trying to make is that, well, separation shouldn't be treated as the French people treat it, like as an end in itself. Like, you should just separate any kind of religious manifestation from the state, and they should be all excluded, because that's the purpose of the state, separating these two institutions and these two phenomena. What liberal pluralists say is that separation is a means to achieve a higher end, which is respect for freedom of conscience and equal respect to all citizens. And this is more relevant now that societies are more plural than they were in the early 20th century. So applying blindly the principle of church and religion separation in contemporary France, for instance, is actually excluding some minorities and is not giving equal respect to Muslim minorities, basically, with all the ban on headscarves in public schools. So this gives, so these people is trying to accommodate and give it greater accommodation to religious claims into the public sphere. So it has been said, okay, in political deliberations, religious arguments and religious justifications might be okay with some sort of requirements, but they are still okay. Or like also there is some openness to like a state having some sort of symbolic endorsement of religion, like crucifixes in attributing some value, like historical or cultural value to crucifixes, for instance, or to the cross, and to some sort of religious symbols. But also this has been has opened the possibility to allow some more presence of religion within the public schools. So this somehow entails the possibility to state funding for private religious schools, or allowing a greater number of religious accommodation. And I want to present the example Charles Taylor gives is the model in Quebec. And this is an interesting model because what he's saying actually is that Quebec was actually it had a sort of French Republican model. They had a similar model that France. So in public schools until, I think, 1990, I don't remember the date, until very recently, religious content in the curriculum was absolutely excluded. There were no possibility to teach Catholicism or Protestantism. It was just like the state was blind to those possibilities. And then they decided, the Quebec society decided not to renew that law, that restriction, but instead they decided to implement the ethics and religious culture program in public schools, which is basically a program that teaches students like the importance of religion or the different history of religion. It's like just trying to acquaint students to the fact that people are religious, they experience their religious life in different ways. And this also recognizes that there is an importance of the spiritual dimension of life. So religion really plays an important role in the life of citizens, and the state, and at least in the province of Quebec, is recognizing that. So this is like the underlying reason justifying the approving this program in public schools. Now, some similar situation happened in Colombia in 1991. It's similar because it is also somehow there is a majoritarian Catholic population, like in France, like in Quebec. But the difference was that there was no regime of secularist regime. It was instead a regime of religious establishment. So from 1886 to 1991, more than 100 years, the Catholic Church was the recognized church of the state, and it had a sort of privileges and functions that was attributed to them, particularly a function on education. So when the state, in the places the state couldn't reach, like marginalized or like places in which the state couldn't have like infrastructure, for instance, the Catholic Church was supplying the function of provide education to those sectors. And it was particularly important in the case of indigenous communities who were like very like in the periphery of the country, so to speak. And the Catholic Church was like sort of like the state sort of outsourced the duty of provide education to these communities, and it was the Catholic Church, obviously with also the intention of some sort of missionary project. So they were at the same time providing education to the indigenous communities, but also they were converting them into Catholicism. And the 1991 Constitution recognized pluralism as an important feature of the Colombian society, and it treated the issue of religious diversity and cultural diversity in very different ways. So it recognizes that there are many churches now, there are many religious denominations. There are mainly, there is the Catholic Church, that is still majoritarian, but now there is a growing presence of evangelical churches. So it recognizes that those churches like have some same rights to the entitlements of the Catholic Church. So it didn't actually restricted much of the rights of the Catholic Church, but it recognized the same rights to these evangelical churches. So now it's very easy for a church to go and get some sort of privileges or facilities by the state. And this was for religious diversity. In the case of cultural diversity, and meaning by that like indigenous minorities, the state, what the state did is to recognize some sort of historical injustice that was perpetrated against these minorities since like the independence 200 years ago, but also like during the colonial time. So it's a 500 years injustice against these communities, and one particular aspect of that injustice was that those communities didn't have access to their own culture because it was the state, it was the Catholic Church who was providing education to them. So the right to access to their own culture was absolutely denied. So it was recognized that the rights for religious indigenous peoples are rights of self-determination, and actually they have like quite a big like sort of autonomy, not only in the case of education, but also like in the legal system. They have some sort of independent system. They are also they have to respect the Constitution, Colombian Constitution, but they have quite a lot of autonomy. So what I was saying is, the particular, so the issue of the indigenous communities, I will leave it aside, and I will focus on the issue of religious diversity. So what the state did actually was to say all religions, I already said it, but all religions have more or less the same rights. So if the Catholic Church enjoys these sort of accommodations or has sort of privileges, well, why not this and that and the other evangelical church? So basically it recognized the importance of religion within society, and it is providing a lot of facilities to the diverse, to all the religious denominations. So instead of restricting the rights the Catholic Church has, which did in the sense with indigenous communities, what it did is like increasing the rights the other churches didn't have before. Now, this has like particular consequences in the case of schools. So before the new constitution in 1991, religious education was somehow mandatory, but legally it was enforced. It was like the Catholic Church had some sort of the duty to provide religious education in public schools. It wasn't so much done in practice, but they had the right to provide religious education in public schools. Now so kids who were going to those schools in which there was religious curriculum, they were somehow obliged to follow that curriculum. Now, the Catholic Church can teach, can take a role in the school, but kids are not obliged, and they don't have to. It's not mandatory to follow the religious curriculum. You just can say some sort of well, and you have the right to do that, paired with the right of conscience objection. And there is another, and I think quite important consequence of this new constitution, is that there is a proliferation of private schools and proliferation of sectarian schools. So, and this is not an elitist sort of schooling, is like Catholic Church is like actually providing, not only Catholic Church, also evangelical churches are providing education to marginalized sectors of society, the poorest sector of society, but also implementing a highly sectarian curriculum, like promote actually following the historical importance that schooling has for the religious organizations to spread the word of their own morality is still there. So they are actually very active in creating new schools and like increasing the number of pilgrims. Well, now, this obviously, to me, this has a consequence that it actually doesn't decreases the power the Catholic Church had before the constitutional modification. It kind of stops it because like some restrictions were made, but still the Catholic Church enjoys a lot of political and social influence among the population. One particular case of this influence it is exercising is the opposition the religious groups have done to initiatives by the government to promote some campaigns of sexual education on sexual diversity and reproductive rights. So the state has had these programs to go to schools, to both public and private schools, and to create some awareness about these issues. And religious schools just oppose to that, and they do it in a quite successful way. So they are actually in the power, in the possibility to sabotage such kind of initiatives. So this is, on my view, this is an interference of the Catholic Church or these religious groups into the governmental programs that do not intend to attack religion, but only to guarantee the rights of citizens, and particularly of citizens that have been marginalized or excluded, as rights of reproductive rights or same-sex rights for homosexual citizens. So these campaigns of sexual reproduction rights, for instance, is not an attempt to attack the Catholic Church. So it's not something that is anti-religious, as it was the case in the French case in the in the promotion of individual autonomy. It's just a case of protecting fundamental rights. So the insight there is that citizens do have the right to, not citizens, but also like kids, do have the right to be socialized in some sort of liberal-friendly environment, which means that the sectarian schools that are proliferating, well, shouldn't have that possibility to adopt or implement such sectarian curriculums. So I want to emphasize this because it's not so in the let's say mainstream debate on secularism. It is usually said that when you're trying to exclude religion from the institutions of the state, you're actually adopting a secularistic attitude, which is usually intended to as a sort of a skepticism about religion. And that is usually defined as an intrinsically illiberal practice, as in the case of an authoritarian critic to secularism, to French secularism. And I want to make it clear, is the cases in which you are just trying to exclude religious content from public schools and private schools it doesn't apply, criticism doesn't apply to this kind of exclusion, because it doesn't have anything to do with religion per se. It's just trying to guarantee some sort of rights. Yeah, that will be all. Thank you.
Questions? Would you like to have the questions together and respond, or one by one?
I think together.
Okay. Sebastian, I have a question for you about how liberal pluralism cashes out in Colombia. You talk about how there's no real opposition to the Catholic Church. There isn't that virulent anti-clericalism that we find, let's say, in France. But on the other hand, you mentioned evangelical churches and greater tolerance of evangelical churches. What happens if I'm outside the churchy domain? Suppose I'm an agnostic or an atheist, or a Nichiren Shoshu Buddhist, or I'm a Shiite Muslim insisting on the right to wear the hijra. Is that okay? I mean, would I pass muster in Colombia, or would I find myself in prison? So, I mean, what kind of inclusion are we talking about? Is it simply inclusion of non-Catholic evangelical churches? Because there are other churches too. The Mormon Church, for example, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, cannot be classified that easily as an evangelical church. Yeah, the United Methodists cannot be classified that easily as an evangelical church, though there are evangelical sub-movements within Methodism. But again, are all those accepted within this framework that's been happening in Colombia since the early 90s?
Yeah, they are included. I emphasized the fact of evangelical churches because this is like the sort of sociological fact. This is what is happening. There are no cases of like Muslim claims, and there's such a small minority that it doesn't really doesn't get into the public debate. But there is actually like last year the first mosque was opened in the capital in Bogota. It was quite not that big, but it's some sort of visible. And there was some people were trying to protest against it, like some sort of let's say Colombian version is Islamophobia. But at the end of the day, it didn't go that far. Like the church, the mosque is there, and if I would say if the Muslim community would like to open a school, it wouldn't be an issue. It is an issue, for instance, with non-religious minorities. For instance, going to the army is mandatory. Objection of conscious objection on religious grounds has preeminence than over secular grounds. If you say I'm just a pacifist, I don't like, I have a morality that doesn't allow me to go to military formation, then you might get the right not to go to the army, but it's much easier, and it is meant to be easier for if you do it on religious grounds, for instance.
It's easier to avoid the draft of going into the military if you're a Quaker, let's say, as opposed to being an agnostic or an atheist.
Yeah, it is.
Like Bertrand Russell. I mean, Bertrand Russell did not
Yeah.
believe in any God, personal or otherwise,
Yeah. It is easier. Actually, this is an anecdotal story. Like I have a friend who works in this sort of helping people not to go to the army, and he was telling me like, well, there was this group of Rastafari guys, and they were saying, okay, if you make the case that that's your religion, you will get it easier, and they did. I mean, they just say I'm a Rastafari, and yeah, they didn't. It was much easier to them, to other people who just opposed to go to the military service on absolutely secular grounds.
Now, I was drawn by your use of the term confessional schools. Could you just explain what you meant by that? One of the slides said confessional schools.
Yeah. Well. I don't have a structured theory of what a confessional school is, but it's basically the idea of it's mainly private schools that follow some sort of religious education. So it's schools that education is provided in relation to religion. So they have the normal curriculum, but religion has if not the most important, it has it's extremely important in the formation of children. So yeah, I wouldn't say confessional school. That might be confusing by sectarian schools. There are schools that actually somehow their target is not so much create citizens or create competent citizens, but create Catholics or evangelics or members of the religious community.
I agree with your conclusion, but I don't see how it falls from the premise. So I will actually defend some sort of what you call the outdated French model that you say does not have actually good fame nowadays. So the idea is this. I have the impression that what comes with some sort of idea of recognition needs also to be looked at in the social context in which some religious faiths have dominance over others. So claims of recognition, in the case of Catholic Church in Italy, or actually in France at the end of the 19th century, also came with the claim that no recognition should be accorded to other minority groups, well, say, other minoritarian religions. So in Italy, for instance, just make a very quick case, all the polemic about the crucifix in the school came also with the claim that no other religious symbols should be in the schools, exactly in virtue of the fact that the crucifix will say that the truly representative symbol of of cultural practice and actually historical practice. So the idea would be that actually maybe the model of strict separation between the church and the state is actually maybe the best approximation of some form of toleration when conditions of dominance of one group or religious group over the other are in place. And it seems to me that actually, in a way, well, that point of view might be accepted by when you say, well, maybe there is a way to be anti-clerical without being, just irrespectful of religious beliefs. So I was just asking what you think about this. Seems to me actually maybe there is more of the French model in what you're saying by the end of the day than what you would like to admit.
No, it is. Let's say the objection of French model of being outdated, I conceive it as being applying to the French model in French society. So what I would say about, as I said in the talk, issues of religious claims or religious tolerance or church-state relations in France are not motivated by the presence of a Catholic Church, for instance. So it's not that Catholic Church might be the majoritarian religion in France, but it doesn't really play a political role. It doesn't really play. It doesn't really interferes with the political life. So it is, when I say it is outdated, is because, well, that landscape that you find in France is partly explained by the model they implemented. Even if it was anti-religious, even if it was illiberal, well, you can explain the secularization of social society, both at the political level and the social level, as an outcome of that political model. So it already managed to privatize or to liberalize the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church somehow respects religious pluralism, is not trying to dismantle the state. It doesn't have that political project. The problem in France now is more about, like I would say, like pluralism is like a multicultural problem, maybe a problem of social exclusion of some minorities, but it's not about some sort of hegemonical church. So it is, I would say it is outdated in the French case. Maybe in Italy it isn't. Maybe Italy would need some sort of insistence of a strict separation just to recall to the crucifix case in public schools. Well, I would say that there are people saying like removing, like doing an unilateral removal of crucifixes in public schools would be anti-religious and would be like disrespectful of the Catholic Church. Well, is not that the case, because the justification for that is actually to somehow finish the project of secularizing the state, meaning by that like consolidating the independence between the institution of the state and the religious institutions.
Yep. See, this movement from authoritarian to liberal pluralism seems to work, at least in the anecdotes you have mentioned, in terms of social practices. But if we have knowledge claims, there might be fundamental disconnects, and I don't know how even anti-clericalism would solve that problem. Like, insisting on evolution, is it authoritarian or not? That's a question I have. So, how do we move away from authoritarianism when issues of knowledge claims come into play?
Well, the debate on evolution is somehow like tricky, but you can perfectly say, well, teaching evolution as a scientific fact is not necessarily in contradiction with religious beliefs. So it's not that the teacher goes there and say, okay, I will give you an argument against the existence of God. It's just, I will give you an explanation of how things are now, like how life in planet Earth came to be. That doesn't mean that the teacher would say, you should live, you should not believe in God because this is in fundamental contradiction to what science says. Like, teachers don't have to say that, and actually there are many religious views that find perfectly fine with the idea of accepting evolution and believing in the existence of a creator or something like that. So the point is, the teacher is not criticizing religion. The teacher is not liberating the individuals from false beliefs. It's just providing an account of what scientific accounts say. Well, now, the issue if evolution should be taught in schools, well, that might be a question of about designing the curriculum or something like that. I don't, like what should the public schools or the schools should say about science? Well, that might be also an issue, but it shouldn't be a contradiction. Insofar as there is no criticism towards religion, I don't see why it should be a big issue.
Yeah, I wanted to know, has the indigenous people in Colombia are able to have their own schools and their own cultures, forms, and has the church been able to, have they been able to sort of separate themselves from the church? And would you say that this is there across Latin America, or is it just an example of, I'm specifically talking about the indigenous communities. Across Latin America, have they been able to separate themselves and set up their own culture and schools and things like that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that they have been able to achieve that, but I do say that their condition, like their access to their own culture, has improved since this has been implemented. So they are actually not. So, for instance, they have territorial rights. So they have like some sort of territorial independence, and they can do, like, let's say, whatever they want inside that territory. So they do have access to. More access to their own culture. So the Catholic Church is not anymore, let's say, the state has to provide with the facilities for the community to build their own schools, and the state has to provide the facilities to give some formation or like pedagogical education to leaders of the community, so they can implement some curriculums in the communities. For instance, they can teach. They don't have to speak Spanish in the school, so they have access to their own language, and those all languages are recognized by the state. So, in certain extent, their situation is better off now after that implementation of that. Since those are like marginalized regions of the country, I would say, well, the Catholic Church is still churches like missionary movements might still have some incidence in the internal affairs of those communities, but despite of that, they have the right, or they have like the state support. Now the state has the obligation to go there and provide with the facilities to construct and to build the schools. And now Colombia is one of the countries that has recognized like broader rights to indigenous communities. So autonomy for indigenous communities is much developed in Colombia than in other countries. But yeah, I mean, I would say that the situation of indigenous communities in the whole Latin America is pretty much the same, like in terms of socioeconomic circumstances, that they are always like the most marginalized sectors of society, the most impoverished sectors of society, and yeah, and well, yeah.
So, Sebastian, I'm here. Yeah. So, are you like kind of, I didn't get a sense of like what kind of model of civic education are you advocating? Is it somewhat like similar to the Republican civic education model in the sense of developing certain kind of virtues? Because if you just like in the French case, it was like quite evident that what had happened was like there was a strong like model of civic education as well. So it was completely like even relegating the role of religion even within the private space of individuals as well. Like, you know, so developing a certain kind of critical mindset where religion is actually like denigrated even, like, you know, so it was like actually getting into the homes of the people, like, you know, through the public education, you get into the homes of the people and you start that completely removing religion from that sphere. But you do not seem to be advocating that kind of an understanding of civic education. But at the same time, then there is a certain kind of problem if you remove like the discussion of religion from schools, but you do not do anything, if you like, you do not engage in the discussion, say at the public level or even at the private level of the homes, then so I don't know. So maybe one of the ways, and maybe you want to comment on this, is we need a certain kind of critical engagement on the issue of religion even within schools. So something which Charles Taylor might be saying is you have to bring in some sort of like religious curriculum so that there is a critical engagement which is possible. And maybe that is only possible if you limit the authority of the, or like authority of the church, but at the same time, like, you know, the state engages with those different kinds of minority groups as well as the majority population. So you know, there is a cross learning possible. Like even in the case of indigenous populations, I don't think it might be a good idea that only indigenous population is learning about their own culture, but maybe the majority should also be learning about what those cultures are. So maybe there is maybe there is more engagement there. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, what people like Taylor says is like, I mean, the spirit of the ethics and religion curriculum is not so much to engage in critical reflection about religion. Is the idea there is to guarantee that the future citizens know that there are different religions. So it's not about like having a critical stance with regards to religion, but it's just like people know that they live in a society that is plural, and that is somehow a way to get like mutual knowledge and like respect across religions. So yeah, the critical thing there is so the thing is issues. So what motivates this program is precisely to avoid religious confrontations, but it's not to avoid the religion going to the state, but it's more to avoid like confrontation between religious groups. So it's basically to avoid what Islamophobia, for instance, is to get citizens or populace to know that there are Muslims in your society and that they are like you, that you can learn from them and they can learn from you, and that the fact that they have some certain different attitudes doesn't make them worth of less respect. So it's not about, so this is more like to try to keep society together. And this is not the case, or at least this is what I'm trying to claim. This is not a case in a society like Colombia or in general Latin America. It's not the case that you have religious confrontation. It's more the case that you have like confrontation from religion towards the state. So this is why I want to like set this separation, and it has to be like carefully designed in a way that you are not actually criticizing religion. You are not actually going to the populace and say religion is wrong. You shouldn't do it. You shouldn't, because well, that would be like falling into the claim of authoritarianism. And then, yeah, of course, the society has to learn about indigenous communities. But I don't think the way I see it is not about respecting religious communities. There is some prejudice against indigenous communities. But what I guess, or I think has to be done is that the state and the large society, the majority society, has to recognize that that communities have been wronged by the larger community, by the majority. And this has not been done. Like the state recognizes this sort of autonomy, but there is no awareness that there has been injustice has been perpetrated against these communities. And that has to be learned, that has to be taught. I definitely think that these kind of omissions in curriculums are just perpetrating a long history of injustice.